and try to compromise in between. We have totally different view and try to compromise to wrap up the presentation in a short time. Wing-Shing and my presentation today try to use a case of southern China, which is next to Dongguan, which is next to Shenzhen, to illustrate the topic of spatial production of injustice. Before I start, I have to say that this presentation is made out of my field work, which I just came back from there on Sunday. And this is the very preliminary work to lay down the future field work and case study. And I'm really typical Hong Kongese, and I had nothing about China before. But for these few 2 years, I tried to understand what does it really mean, urbanization process in these 30 years. It's amazing that Shenzhen becoming a huge city next to Hong Kong. An outline. We will firstly locate the case of Dongguan, because for the international workshop, to situate Dongguan in China, to point out its geographical specificity for urbanization process since 1979. Second, making more simple, but it could be very complicated, to introduce the past and the present of Dongguan. Can I have the laser pointer? And third, our presentation objective and methods. Fourth, we will situate the case study of one of super industrial towns, Tangxia, in Chinese, to describe my fieldwork in the 3 villages. Fifth, in this presentation, I will use only one of the examples to illustrate our questions. First, the question are I try to describe the space. And the second is I try to explain the space and the changes, including the village organization and its economy, and people's living and work and power relations. Okay. And finally, Wing-Shing will try to make some conclusion and or open for discussion. Objective and methods. In this presentation, I've tried to situate the urbanization process of Dongguan in wider perspective first. Then I will use the empirical study and my fieldwork experience to illustrate some points. And the objective of the case study focus on the village and town level. The perspective is mainly about space and related processes. Under the larger context, the question of the case study is to ask how the village reorganized the space and how the village managed themselves into collective form even nowadays, and how the village redistribute their resources, for example, the land, housing, work, and wealth in terms of shares. And the methods of the fieldwork is more like an ethnographic approach. I start for some time adopting mapping exercise with the local villagers and interview with them, and some observation in the village for a short period of time so far. And this chart actually show how I have contact with the local for mapping exercise and interview. Firstly, mainly through a Hong Kong social work supervisor who offered training in Tangxia town. Then I could manage to make some contact and expand my network with the different local people. Then locating Dongguan. This is the map of Guangdong, which is the first experimentation of economic reform in China in 1979. The yellow zone The yellow zone is the Purple Delta, in which the State Council designates and demarcates its boundary for foreign direct investment since 1985. Today, the Purple Delta emerged into a huge urban economic engine in these 30 years. Its concentration from a political, social, economic entity partly realized what Deng Xiaoping said, let some of the people to get rich first. Nowadays, this region concentrates at least 57 million of registered inhabitants, which share half of the population in the whole Guangdong province. It also takes up 80 to 90% of economic power and resources in the whole province. And this map Yeah. This map below shows the Purple Delta city, the core cities. It could show the eastern corridor, which starts from Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Dongguan, until Guangzhou, and the western corridor, and from Macau, and then and end in Guangzhou also, and in which Hong Kong, Macau, and Guangzhou are supposed to be the core city of the regional growth. And Dongguan, which is located in between Hong Kong and Guangzhou on the eastern corridor. And its position is subject to the secondary under the level of Shenzhen, which is the special economic zone under the support of the national policy. The past of Dongguan. Different from the special economic zone in Shenzhen, Dongguan has nothing and no advantage of centrality like Guangzhou, nor has it have any backup or grant or any favorable policy from the central state. However, Dongguan had to learn to struggle in between these strong candidates in the region within 30 years. The first reason is that Dongguan could be upgraded from a county level to the city level. In the 1985, its political level becoming the county level system. In the 1987, it became the prefecture level city. That means Dongguan could be granted by the state more power to design its economic trajectory in economic reform. On the left bottom corner, Dongguan's administrative this one. Here. On the Dongguan administrative structure is the city-town level structure without the county system in between, which made the whole admin structure more flexible and efficient for foreign capital. Under the city, its city now expand. This is the city. Expand into 4 urban sub-districts. There are also 28 industrial towns in the countryside, which is the green zone. On the top and right corner, the chart shows the population increase, in which I want to say the 1990 was the most rapid increase of population. The purple is the total overall population in Dongguan. The orange is the migrant population. The migrant shows at least 50 to 70% of the total population. On the bottom, the map shows the internal connection of Dongguan through the superfast cross-border highways and railway that made Dongguan linking to Guangzhou on the north, and Zhuhai and Nansha on the west. This is the western corridor, and Shenzhen on the south, and another city, Guizhou, on the east. It has been said that Dongguan's urbanization process is mainly achieved by rural industrialization and urbanization. The yellow zone shows the major configurations of urbanization process of Dongguan. There were basically the countryside, which nowadays become the industrial towns. And this is the case study site. I came here to conduct my field work. The largest on average, the largest industrial towns could have the population up to the 500,000, which is here the darkest one, in which the migrants compose of 70%. And the population size is equal to the economic performance, which record to the highest GDP in Dongguan. And case study. I have made some interview in 4 villages so far. Here are the 3 mapping exercise taken with the local people in order to identify the land uses of the village for my initial stage of my fieldwork. And the case Tangxia is an early industrial town developed since economic reform. It is located exactly along actually here is the KCR train, the Kowloon and Canton train, linking between Hong Kong and Dongguan until Guangzhou. Its population has 500,000, and migrants share 70% in total. My job is to identify, through the mapping exercise, the border of the villages and the current land use distribution, and the most obvious land uses. You could identify the gray zone, and which is the industrial land. And the yellow zone, most of them is rental housing. The pink, this is the pink, this is also the pink, are the new type of the village housing constructed by the village. They live by themselves. And in form of the villas, or this is the high-rise apartment, and fully gated with all the facilities. Okay, I use one example to illustrate the case. Sichuan in Mandarin, which is literally called 4 villages. There are around 1,000, this is the boundary. There are 1,000 local Hukou people living here, and plus 11,000 non-local Hukou living here within this boundary at least. And I try to describe the space. This huge area with the wet border I marked was a hill with some flat land, which was expropriated by the land expropriated by the township government since 2001 to construct its new political center. This is the new political center for the township government. You could see a really clear transportation network, the government center, and its huge public square. And facility like museum and library. You probably find exactly the same form in other cities in China, in Shenzhen, in Guangzhou. Next to the political center is usually commercial. This is commercial and residential area. This is also the land was taken away from the villages. And also industrial zone, in which the land was taken in 2000. Now it become a hotel site and some low-density private residential area along the lake. The gray zone is the industrial zone, and the village has 3 industrial zones under their name, renting out for foreign capitalists for industrial production. Yellow, as I said, which is the rental housing, which composed of 2 types of housing. One is traditional houses, and the other one is 5-story tenement buildings. Most of them are used for renting housing for the migrant workers. And the pink is what I said is the current village housing. Around 2008, half of the village population moved into the high-rise building. Now they have constructed phase 1, which has 6 blocks, 11 floors, and the size of units is over 1,000 square feet, and until 2000, and also 2,000 square feet. Inside, you could find some green landscape library in the center of this block. And badminton court, and other facility for the villagers. However, the area is totally gated. If I enter, I need to have somebody to know, and then I could enter. With also CCTV installation. Here, the question is how, after mapping, I have to answer myself how such space could be emerged and how this space could be reorganized over time to time, and who are in charge in the production of space. How could land and wealth redistribute? And these are the questions that are missing for me, and however, these are very main key to understand the space and processes, especially if this place is the major configuration of rural urbanization in Pearl Delta. How could the village develop into part of the global system, like Dongguan becoming the global factory? And first, I will point out the village organization. Today, the village administrative system in Dongguan has two types. Some of the village are under Chen Wei, and the other one is Zhu Wei. And I will explain. In Dongguan, Chen Wei is the village committee, and some set up since 1997. But some of other villages are already converted by the township government into the residential committee, which is set up in 2004. The differences, what are the differences in between? Officially speaking, the system of residential committee is fully under the jurisdiction of township and city government, including the land and Hukou system under the urban category. For example, when you go to Tangxia, and the township government would say, oh, we have 100% urbanization already. But what does it really mean? But practical speaking, there are no differences. I was told by the villagers, what are the differences? And there are so many changes in terms of administrative structure. And then what are the differences between? And then, but land, they said, oh, land still belong to the collectively owned. And the villager still have the right to use the land, but until the land expropriation. And whatever the village committee or the residential committee, to a larger extent, a certain extent, they have also followed the collective organization set up by Mao Zedong in 1950. I try to hypothesize, or I don't need to hypothesize, but I would say they are really similar in terms of collective form, how to organize the village. It is the period when Mao established the collective movement and people commune system in rural China. The photo on the left shows the production brigade to organize the means of production in a village. And the basic structure of production brigade is very simple. I was told by the village, like this chart, there are 5 major positions to organize everything: land, neighbor, wage, and family in the village. This red dot is the party secretary, which is nominated, of course, by the township government to the village, which could make the ultimate decision to his inferior and also the whole village. The yellow post are also important, that become an altogether 5-man rules, becoming the manager for the whole villages. Second, I will elaborate more later. Second is the village economy, which is highly affected by the village organization. From the 1950s onward, I would say the economy has been basically collective productions, collective form of production, except the period between 1980 and the mid-1990s. It is highly related to different ways of how to organize the village land. The collective economic system is up here. This is the first when Mao Zedong created a collective economic system under the People's Commune and could mobilize all the neighbor power and the land into the collective and hierarchical form. Individual land was under collective system by abolishing the private land ownership. Then from 1980s to mid-1990s, it was the very important period for the villages, but also for the state. County in the 80s abolished the commune system. That means we distribute all the agricultural land to individual households. That is called the rural household residential policy. This is very exceptional period in the 80s that the villagers, they told me they could enjoy the relative freedom and productivity of agriculture could also rapidly increase to double and triple times. Meanwhile, the power of production brigade, they still have some job and mainly manage the collective assets such as the public canteens and the ancestral hall or gathering halls, and these are the building stock and eventually convert in the 1979 for the export-oriented small-scale industrial production. They call it the three-hall economy. And during this system, the villagers were working in the farm during the busy season and also working in the factory. So a village told me that they could really enjoy have enough to eat and manage to save some money to improve their material life. And afterward, it changed. The rapid industrialization process only started after Deng Xiaoping came to the south in 1992, and which turned Dongguan's countryside to be the global factory. When Deng Xiaoping came to Guangdong to say, to speed up the economic reform to assure the confidence of the foreign investor. But since then, this is the Deng Xiaoping effect. The agricultural land was again expropriated by the production brigade with little compensation to the villagers by converting the agricultural land into the larger industrial site. And today, Sichuan village has 3 industrial areas which were built on the agricultural land. And this is also important time that collective organization under the production brigade and party secretary has consolidated power by taking back the land from the villagers, accumulating the wealth under the name of collective interest. This is so important for them. In order to get your land, this is because for the collective interest, you will eventually benefit. But this is not the real case. But actually the case is most of the money went into the individual pocket of the secretary, party secretary in the village committee. And the individual villages are under the collective system. They were given the yearly base share from the income of collective enterprise. 90% of the village depend on renting out the land for industrial capitalists, and they get the rent, and then at the end of the year, they will redistribute the share among the village. The share, for example, nowadays they have around 5,000 RMB, mean 820 US dollar. It's only small part of the household expenditure nowadays. And in 2000, as I mentioned, almost half the villages' land was expropriated by the township government to build a political and economic center. The last agricultural land, which was located here, which was the huge fruit and lychee garden, eventually was taken for the new constructions with compensation to the villagers. I want to come back to the latest form of the village organization. This slide is trying to update when somebody would say, oh no, after 1004, the villagers, they had the right to elect their village chief. What does it mean, election? is nothing for them, because the first point I want to locate is the nature of organization. They are still the same. In practical, they are still under the control of party secretary, still nominated by the township government. If you are the party secretary, you want to renew your contract, you must have all the connection and corruption and kick off, something like that. But how about any changes? Yes, they have some changes. The distribution of the economic benefit. In the 50s, the village was based on the working days, and also the productivity of one person. If you are a strong man, I give you higher wage on regular basis. This is what they told me. But before, they just counting on the base of the working days. In the 1997, or around after that, the villagers did not need to engage in production. They just, because they sacrificed their land, they just received the share of the collective income according to the number of the person in their household. For example, I just said 5,000 RMB per head. Then maybe you have 4 person, you have something in total. And in 2004, the government said, no, they have the shareholding company. I asked, what does it really mean? But what I said is that the nature is no change for the villagers. They just, the distribution system was frozen. Instead of counting the head of the household, they fixed the number of the share. That means even your baby is born, no share will be given to the new baby, or a person die, and the shares could transfer to the particular family, and then it's frozen to the fixed number. That is the part of the system of the shareholding company we formed in the 2004. And the almost last, in 2000 here is about the living and the work of the villagers. How could the villagers survive? Even their agricultural land was taken away. In the 1980s, they were living in the traditional houses, working both factory worker or shop owners and in the farm. In the 1993, I heard one story. One village mobilized all the villagers in Sichuan to resist the production brigade to sell part of the collective land. It was a successful mobilization of the village to push the government to redistribute back the land along the main road to the villagers by building the housing for the villagers themselves, but not selling the land. And so everyone used most of their saving to buy the land lot at a cheaper price and build their 5-story houses. And since 1997, the villagers gradually moved from here to this 5-story building only after 1997, which is the type of the second generation of the village housing. In 2001, in the huge land expropriation I mentioned, the villages' fruit and lychee garden and farm were taken away because of expecting compensation from the township government. The villagers could manage to maximize their compensation of 5 minutes by putting more lychee and crops, as many as possible. This is only how I would say why you don't mobilize the people to against, but because this is the township project, the government new project, they could not say anything. They could only resist in terms of the compensation. And the last one is here. The new style of the high-rise village housing. In 2008, half of the people could eventually, because of getting some compensation from the lychee garden, then they could buy one of the units in this high-rise. Half of the village's population moved here after 2005, but this is there are 2 points I would say. The villagers will be very happy because their existing housing stock could be vacant for the rental housing for the migrant workers. Second, they realized that in order to construct this village housing, the party secretary, they already used this opportunity by building the village housing to realize their personal benefit through kickback with the construction company. The last slide is my conclusion. And I have tried to make some simple diagram about the power relations. I just so far to manage to identify the higher level government, Chinwei, village organization, and also individual villages, and then and how to understand how a village in Dongguan has been urbanized. And 2 points. One is the power of government could be exercised in terms of domination of the township government and village committee. The individual villagers has been always resisting at another level. And although I did not mention anything about the migrant workers, they're so important in my study. From my fieldwork, they are totally excluded from the village. And physically and socially, they never get any Hukou system, although the township government already have the system. You can apply for the Hukou, but they cannot, because if they apply the Hukou in Dongguan, their land in hometown will be taken away. This is all the contradiction and dilemmas I found out, and for me is the first step. I step to the village to understand what does it mean urbanization processes. Sorry, Wing-Shing.
Okay. So what this study tries to do is to take up a lot of the debate in the literature. We are not happy with the literature we're trying to study because they have simply, basically, mostly taken, analytical tools from the West and then just apply them. So in that sense, what we are trying to do here is to reject all this through the detailed case study on the so-called very, material side of it, the land relations. This is, in a sense, complement Kam Wing's work coming from Hukou. We find it, we need to ground it on the floor, because that's what we human beings live. And we try to do it also to reject, I think quite a lot of theoristic categories that have been happening in the China research and also in the West. So what we are trying to do here is to, through the case study, show you, the complexity of the town-country relations in China. As they coexist in the towns and the country, even for the cities, they are at least, first of all, you have to call place designation. You have to get the approval from the state in order for a city. And even for the city, you have 2 types of hierarchical. And then for the towns, you have all this complexity. And for land, land ownership is completely different. We are talking about state ownership, so to speak, in the city, and then so-called collective ownership in the rural area. And a lot of people would try to argue that China has a dual land system. I would say it's not the case. It's simply one system. The one collective is in the process of converging into the state ownership, and that's why that makes things complex. And that's why a lot of scholars, especially Western scholars, could not really comprehend it. As I think Tammy has shown you, the collective ownership nowadays is very complicated. It went through all the way, from, I think, what Tammy has not said it is even, before 1949, the customary land ownership system in the Pearl River Delta is very complicated. Tomorrow I might touch on a little bit of it, and then go through the the history, again go through 1949 collectivization, household representative. Then you can see the complexity which you could not really recognize by a lot of so-called Western categories in order to understand the land development. And so also another thing is in the although we have seen the conversion of a lot of land into land development now, but it's very different. We are talking about the difference in, I think is in the West we are every one of us should we say us chasing after the individual inalienable right. We have to do that. But in the Chinese case, we're talking about collective well-being, and so nowadays what we see is that kind of complexity. That kind of complexity, really reflecting what Tammy's case show, and these kind of complexity extremely difficult really to capture by all these Western categories. So in a sense, what we are trying to do is, unlike some of my earlier works, I try to look at it in a more conceptually. This time we will just, instead of more conceptually, I just use one case and then speak for the two. And I think that's what we are trying to do in this project.
So, please.
May I ask one question beyond this topic? I suddenly realize the so-called election of the Chinway, the village committee chief, or is it the village chief? It seems it's resembling very much the coming 2017 Hong Kong chief executive election. It's all the same story, right? It looks as very democratic, but in fact, it's not. It's a kind of nomination negotiation, and then you choose among all the rotten apples.
Of the visitors, so far we don't have universal suffrage for the election of our so-called mayor and something like this. And so, sorry, I just want to get that.
Do you, according to your understanding, are we going to face the similar situation as you encounter so often in
It is a
Guangdong Township?
It is a real question.
A real question, very serious. The same, is it the so-called the village election of the chief? Is it the same? I think Professor Chen understand.
I was told by the villagers is the party secretary still nominated by the township government. They still have the chief, but under the secretary, and also have another village representative, and hope to counterbalance the whole thing. But eventually it failed, it's totally failed. The villagers had to tolerate the whole system, and in order to get their own protection of themselves. And this is the simple story, I think.
I would just add that this is what I said at the very end, is still one party state. And Hong Kong is increasingly moving into sort of Chinese characteristic, what I call.
So now it's a good opportunity for me to come to visit Hong Kong. Later we'll change it. Sorry, I might have things.
Anyhow.
Yeah, I mean, I really admire the path that you're taking, especially what you spelled out, and so on. I'm just wondering, look, based on what you said, whether it's how does it work if your method is reversed?
Sorry?
How does it work if your method is reversed? Because Wing-Shing very clearly said that you're trying to kind of like find what happens really on the ground, and then to kind of like build up or jump scale or So, but what you were trying to do was kind of like you were trying to map out the large, like and gradually come, and then you focused on something, and then you talked about that particular area in Dongguan. What if you first started from there, and started, like to understand what's going on from there and from locality, then started figuring out, what it leads to build the larger picture from the small. And of course, if you needed to add other places, you need to add other places, and so on. What difference would it make?
I tried bottom up. I was told by Christian Schmidt to do my as current supervisor to bottom up, to go to Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Dongguan, and also go to another part of the River Delta, to understand what is happening on the ground. Oh, but I was really lost. And then this is impossible. And then, no.
Christian.
No, but I want to say, I go to one place, it's fascinating. I go to oil painting village, everywhere is fascinating. And then how could I really understand what happened there? It's so fast. And in terms of the physical infrastructure, you change on the base of 3 years, or social, maybe not the organization, but everything is fast. I cannot have the spatial structure. Why I suddenly from the bottom to go up to understand the wider perspective, to try to negotiate in between. The wider perspective is so important. It is the structure and the power is so present here. But I would really details and understand what the differences. And this is only my first step to the village. And then, to do that, I have to map out what are the map uses you could not find in Google Maps, or and then now I try to understand the basic space and how to organize. Then I will really try to further to question the social injustice in terms of when some people would say, oh, urbanized village, would it be the urban model for the future? But I would really hesitate to agree with that statement. Urbanized village is the whole power relation. This is, I want to take into the detail to understand power relation. How the villages themselves, are they greedy or they are resisting or whatever. This is my purpose, to explore the possibility. Go from bottom up to top down in negotiating between something like that.
So if you start
to answer your question, we start off with very rigid theoristic categories, top, down, center, local, and all this thing, and then we try to debate all this. I think it's a rather unfruitful debate. First of all. Second of all, in the Chinese system, you must recognize that, as I said before, just for simplistic, I might be putting the heuristic myself. Then, so to speak, in the West, you talk about the individual in inalienable right. So, you go from the top, so to speak, bottom up, you find it, But the thing is, in a system that, has been, so to speak, condensed for, more than 5,000 years, we have all this, we're talking about collective and all these things. So, you tend to see all this, one person, so many linkages, tie you up, and then if you don't try to untangle it, it's important, it's difficult for you to see things. I think it's good. Yeah. Empirically, and then I would say, epistemologically.
No, I'm not saying it should be empiricist, but I'm saying theorizing rather than applying a theory. It's just if the ground was so unclear and you couldn't make any sense out of it, and then when you went the other way around, if you made sense out of it, I think it's worthwhile asking how did that happen, and what kind of sense is this? Is this a local sense, or is it some other sense that you are putting into the local? Yes.
No, I always want to debate what we are doing is empirical analysis. Yeah. But I shouldn't say that.
No, Solomon.
Yeah.
Well, it's a question related to this. But starting specifically, and again, building on this issue of moving beyond binaries of top-down or bottom-up. I mean, what I was seeing in those slides where you had different forms of expropriation, between the production brigade and then also the town committee. So I was wondering whether, as part of a research method, you actually, rather than falling into this bottom-up, top-down, you actually are able to focus attention on particular key nodes of power, where the control of territory gets shifted, or where power shifts to empower or disempower other groups. And in that sense, if we look, the question is, from your ethnography of this, would you revisit the term expropriation, because it's coming out of group dynamics rather than, say, like even in the Indian Land Acquisition Act, the differences between when individuals are notified and a group is notified. So the term expropriation seems
I didn't listen too carefully. I was talking.
No,
So just a moment.
Blame me.
No. I was trying to bring you. So I
it's partly maybe a comment. I don't know whether the term expropriation is actually a complicated term from your
What's
ethnography.
complicated term?
And you mean among different officials,
Yeah.
different level of. This is, I don't know how far I could reach, because I was so lucky to go to the village, because I would be easily identified to be the outsider. The local, now they are so sensitive with the land conflict.
Yeah.
Then I try to, every moment I go to the site, I have to break down into two, and also break down into more multiple. For example, first I broke down, I asked the question, are the villages equal to the Chenwei village committee? I thought they were the same, but they are different. Then I have to try to start more the multiple, and in order to make it more, try to capture the complexity. The government official would be my next step, and then I already.
They won't talk to you.
Yeah, but you don't know, because I already talked to some local cadet, the eldest one, and then they would tell me another story. If instead of talking to the government official at the beginning, I avoid that, because they told me the official story. I try to talk to the ordinary people, even they are the secretary in the past, and this is what I could do, and try to capture the complexity, although I want to learn more from the anthropology.
And for one question, you want to comment?
Just one question. You mentioned about your field experience. How you see the flow of the population and the flow of, very much about the structure as far as representation. How about the change, and also the flow of the migrant population, where the money goes, what sort of exploitation of the land value, that sort of thing going in and out, which are informed whole urban landscape in Dongguan, which is interesting in a way, because it's a flow rather than the structure itself, which are more interesting. If you really take Dongguan as an example, just ask any Japanese or Taiwanese business people, they talk about the sort of global production site, a part of the sales site as the supply chain, or different type of thing going into maybe your cyanide issue when you talk to a Japanese company, or talk with the informant, namely the Taiwanese merchant or the other who are not exactly the direct player in the decision making, but they are the influential kingmaker in a way.
I think yes, you're right. You're talking about what is the global movement. Nevertheless,
Yeah,
none of these are, so to speak, mediated locally.
Yeah, you need
media locally, even for that, in order for the factory to get a plot of land for industrial production, it has to go through the Chunwei. And so, in that sense, then, if
dangerous.
Huh?
That would be dangerous. Observing if someone is playing the casino rather than going into the city. You can observe what happens rather than going into top with the government official. You end up in the prison or something.
Yes, I think two-level type of analysis. You're talking about your flow of your capital and then you're building it up. And now we are trying to get into, I think, I would argue more politics. The politics and how land has been collected and used and other things. I think that would be a lot more important in interest. Sorry about that. That's my observation. Sorry.
Mrs. Tang.
Because it's already over time.
But I think we need a cup of coffee, isn't it? Especially for the Europeans. Yeah. So now let us go down and then grab a cup of coffee and then coming back.